There was a time when Ali MacGraw seemed to have it all: beauty, fame, and the kind of love story the world dreamed about. To millions, she was the perfect woman beside Hollywood's king of cool, Steve McQueen. But behind the headlines and red carpets, their marriage became something far darker than anyone imagined. Decades later, Ali speaks of those years not with bitterness, but with a quiet sadness, the kind that comes from surviving a love that nearly destroyed her, the perfect illusion. Before Steve McQueen entered her life, Ali MacGraw was already America's sweetheart. After the success of Love Story in 1970, she was one of Hollywood's brightest stars, elegant, intelligent, and adored worldwide. Her Golden Globe win and Oscar nomination made her the face of a generation that believed in romance and tragedy. At the time, she was married to Robert Evans, the powerful Paramount producer behind The Godfather and Rosemary's Baby. They were the ultimate Hollywood power couple, glamorous, confident, and envied by all. But in 1971, everything changed. Evans encouraged Ali to take a role in a new action film called The Getaway, starring opposite Steve McQueen. McQueen was already a legend: tough, magnetic, unpredictable. On screen, he was the rebel every man admired and every woman wanted. Off-screen, he was intense and moody, shaped by a broken childhood and a lifetime of mistrust. When Ali met him on set in Texas, the attraction was instant. She would later say, "I was obsessed with Steve from the moment he stepped into my world." It wasn't a slow burn, it was an explosion. McQueen's dangerous charm pulled her in like gravity, and for a woman who had lived most of her life with structure and restraint, he represented something wild, something she couldn't control. Their chemistry on camera was undeniable, and soon the lines between fiction and reality blurred. What began as a performance turned into a secret affair that burned through every boundary. Ali's marriage to Evans collapsed under the weight of scandal, and McQueen left his wife, Neely Adams, ending a 16-year union. In 1973, the two stood together before the world, newly married, radiant, and seemingly unstoppable. To the public, it was a Hollywood dream come true. But for Ali, it was the beginning of a nightmare she never saw coming. Control and possession. Marriage to Steve McQueen should have been the happy ending to Ali MacGraw's fairy tale. She had given up everything: her marriage, her reputation, even her sense of security, to be with the man she believed was her soulmate. But once the cameras stopped flashing, the reality of life with McQueen quickly became something else entirely. Steve McQueen was a man built from chaos. His childhood was marked by neglect and violence, a father who disappeared, a mother who battled alcoholism, and years spent in reform schools. Those scars never left him. They shaped his relationships, especially with women. He needed control, constant reassurance, and complete loyalty. To him, love meant ownership. Ali, still glowing from her recent success, didn't recognize the danger at first. She saw his jealousy as passion, his possessiveness as proof that he cared. But soon, those traits became suffocating. McQueen demanded that she stop acting altogether. He didn't want his wife on movie sets surrounded by other men, didn't want her face in magazines, didn't want her independence. And Ali, deeply in love and determined to keep the peace, agreed. She walked away from Hollywood at the height of her career, one of the biggest sacrifices of her life. But even her submission couldn't calm him. McQueen's temper was unpredictable, triggered by the smallest things. If she looked at another man, he accused her of betrayal. If she spoke too freely, he called her disloyal. He would disappear for days, drowning himself in drugs, alcohol, and affairs with other women, then return as if nothing had happened. Ali tried to rationalize it, telling herself he was hurt, broken, misunderstood. "I thought my love could fix him," she would later admit. But love wasn't enough. McQueen's demons ran deeper than she could ever reach. His need for control turned into rage, and rage into abuse. What had begun as a story of two beautiful stars had turned into a private prison, and Ali, once the symbol of grace and freedom, now lived under the shadow of fear and silence. Breaking point. By the mid-1970s, the cracks in Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen's marriage had widened beyond repair. The passion that once drew them together had turned volatile, consuming both of them in cycles of suspicion, anger, and regret. To the outside world, they still looked like Hollywood royalty, the beautiful actress and the rebellious movie star, but inside their home, it was a battlefield. McQueen's insecurity became relentless. He monitored her phone calls, questioned her whereabouts, and demanded absolute transparency. He wanted to know every detail of her day, every person she spoke to. When she tried to defend herself, the conversations quickly escalated into shouting, accusations, and sometimes violence. Ali began to live cautiously, measuring every word and movement to avoid setting him off. The emotional toll was enormous. She had walked away from a thriving career to build a life around a man who didn't trust her. Friends began to notice her disappearance from public life, but few knew the extent of her suffering. In interviews years later, she would recall McQueen's explosive temper and his constant suspicion of infidelity. "He would interrogate me endlessly," she said. "If I denied something, he didn't believe me. And if I stayed silent, that made him angrier." The worst came after she suffered a miscarriage, a devastating loss that left her both physically and emotionally shattered. She had dreamed of giving their marriage a new beginning, of softening his hardness through fatherhood. But instead of comfort, she was met with indifference. McQueen barely reacted, offering no compassion or support. For Ali, it was the moment she realized how isolated she had become. Still, she didn't leave. Like many who loved deeply and blindly, she believed she could somehow fix him. But the truth was that McQueen's demons were stronger than her devotion. His addictions to drugs, alcohol, adrenaline, and women kept feeding his self-destruction. And as his world spun faster, Ali's began to collapse. By 1977, after 5 years of turmoil, she stood at a crossroads. The woman who once graced the cover of Time magazine as Hollywood's next great star now found herself broken, dependent, and unsure of who she really was. The marriage that had promised passion and protection had instead left her with fear and emptiness. It was then that she made the most painful decision of her life: to walk away from the man she still loved, but could no longer survive. After the fall. When Ali MacGraw left Steve McQueen in 1978, she walked away from more than a marriage. She walked away from an entire identity. For years, she had been defined by her relationships, by her image as the elegant leading lady and the loyal wife to Hollywood's king of cool. Now, she was alone, without a career, and bound by a prenuptial agreement that left her with almost nothing. The decision she once made out of love had become her punishment. The divorce was painful and humiliating. She had given up her fame to please him, only to be discarded when she tried to reclaim her life. "It felt like I'd lost everything," she later admitted. Her career, once filled with promise, had grown cold. The industry had moved on without her, and the woman who once headlined box office hits found herself struggling to find work. To cope with the pain, Ali turned to alcohol, a quiet escape that quickly became a dangerous companion. She drank not to forget McQueen, but to forget herself. The emotional scars of their marriage, combined with years of pressure, perfectionism, and public scrutiny, drove her deeper into dependency. "I was running from my own reflection," she would later confess. Her breaking point came when she realized she could no longer keep pretending. Friends intervened, urging her to seek help. In a moment of courage, she checked herself into the Betty Ford Clinic. It was the hardest decision she ever made. Not because she feared the treatment, but because she had to face the truth she'd been avoiding for years. The truth that her pain wasn't just about Steve McQueen or lost fame, it was about her own inability to value herself outside of love and approval. At Betty Ford, Allie began the long process of rebuilding. Therapy forced her to confront her past, her choices, and the part of her that kept seeking salvation through others. It was there that she understood what had kept her trapped for so long. A desperate need to please, to fix, to save. The journey was neither quick nor easy, but slowly she began to reclaim her sense of self. Sobriety became her anchor, and for the first time in decades, she started to feel peace. By the early 1990s, Allie MacGraw had finally closed the door on Hollywood. She moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, trading film sets for quiet mornings and open skies. The woman who once lived for the spotlight now found solace in solitude and in rediscovering who she really was, finding herself again. In the quiet stillness of Santa Fe, Allie MacGraw began to breathe again. For the first time in her adult life, there were no cameras, no producers, no controlling voices telling her who to be. She lived simply, surrounded by nature, animals, and a small circle of friends who valued her not as a movie star, but as a person. What had once been a life of chaos was replaced by calm routine and reflection. Sobriety gave her clarity, and with that clarity came a kind of peace she had never known. She often said she wished she and Steve McQueen could have met later in life, when both were sober, calmer, and more self-aware. "I wish we had both grown old sober," she confessed in one interview. "There were wonderful days and dreadful days." Her words carried no bitterness, only sorrow, the quiet sadness of a woman who had seen both the best and the worst sides of love. Allie never remarried after McQueen. She had other relationships, even brief romances with men like Warren Beatty and Peter Weller, but none lasted. Eventually, she realized she didn't need a partner to feel complete. "I used to rewrite the past, fantasize about the future," she said. "But now, I believe in living fully to the very best of my ability. I feel very blessed." In Santa Fe, she found purpose beyond acting. She became an advocate for animal welfare, using her platform to speak out for abandoned and mistreated animals. Later, she collaborated with Ibu, a global fashion collective supporting female artisans around the world. It was a way to connect her lifelong love of art and design with something meaningful, a life that empowered others. Her days were simple: long walks, quiet reading, moments of gratitude. Gone was the woman chasing love and approval. In her place stood someone wiser, humbler, and stronger. A woman who had faced addiction, heartbreak, and loss, and still chosen peace. When asked if she regretted her life, Allie said no. Every mistake, every scar, had led her to this moment of stillness. The fame, the chaos, the heartbreak, they were chapters in a story that taught her how to love herself. And though the world will always remember her as Jenny from Love Story, Allie MacGraw knows her greatest story was not written on screen. It was the one she lived, survived, and finally made peace with. Steve McQueen's final days and legacy. After their divorce, Steve McQueen's life followed a familiar pattern: success shadowed by self-destruction. He continued acting in major films like The Towering Inferno and Tom Horn, but his restlessness only grew. Fame no longer satisfied him. The man who had once ruled Hollywood with his swagger now seemed haunted, always running from something invisible. He threw himself into racing, chasing the same rush that had once come from fame, from danger, from control. But behind the adrenaline was a man falling apart. McQueen's health began to fail in the late 1970s. Persistent coughing, fatigue, and breathing trouble led to a devastating diagnosis: pleural mesothelioma, an aggressive form of cancer often linked to asbestos exposure. Doctors told him it was incurable. True to his nature, McQueen refused to accept it. He sought unconventional treatments in Mexico, everything from coffee enemas to animal cell injections, desperate for a miracle. But his condition worsened. On November 7, 1980, Steve McQueen died of a heart attack after surgery to remove a tumor. He was only 50 years old. His death shocked Hollywood and left fans around the world mourning the loss of a legend, the rebel, the outsider, the man who embodied cool. But for those who had truly known him, including Ali MacGraw, the grief ran deeper. When the news reached her, Ali was devastated. Despite everything, the jealousy, the pain, the years of silence, a part of her had never stopped caring for him. "It's very sad to me that as sober, grown-up, non-sexually connected beings, we didn't get to sit down and clean it all," she said years later. It was the regret of a woman who had loved fiercely, but never found closure. In the decades that followed, new stories about McQueen's darker side came to light, accounts from his first wife, Neela Adams, and others who had lived through his violence, infidelity, and paranoia. The myth of the King of Cool began to unravel, revealing a man both magnetic and deeply wounded. Yet even knowing all that, Ali refused to reduce him to his worst moments. "I'm not a victim in any way," she once said. "There were many times that were just wonderful, and there were many times that were just ghastly." Her compassion, even after all the pain, spoke volumes. She didn't romanticize him, but she didn't hate him either. He was, to her, a man broken by his own demons, someone she once loved, and perhaps always would in a quiet, unspoken way. Today, when Ali looks back, she doesn't dwell on tragedy. She remembers the lessons, the survival, and the peace she found after chaos. Steve McQueen remains part of her story, not as the man who ruined her life, but as the man whose storm taught her how to rebuild it. Ali MacGraw's story is a reminder that even the most glamorous love can hide deep pain. She lost everything for a man the world adored, and yet through heartbreak and survival, she found herself again. At 85, she lives quietly in New Mexico, far from Hollywood, at peace with the past that once nearly broke her. What do you think about Ali and Steve's story? Was it true love, or just a beautiful illusion that turned tragic? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Golden Throwback for more untold stories behind Hollywood's brightest stars.